We are LifeChurch Livonia.
2, 3. It is so good to be here with you this morning. My name is Brian. I'm the pastor here, and I've been gone for a couple of weeks at conferences and a little bit of vacation, and I want you to know that I am so glad to be home. Not just home to my family, but home to here, this church, because you guys are my family as well, and I missed you while I was gone, and some of you are like, you were gone? Which hurts. That hurts deeply, okay? My feelings are hurt. You owe me a hug after the service, okay? But I'm just really glad to be back, and my prayer is that as you come here today, if maybe this is your first time or maybe you've just been checking the church out, my prayer is that you would begin to feel about this place the way I do. That when you're away, you can't wait to be back because there's something special in this place as we come together and we explore what it means to be in a relationship with God, and we grow deeper in that. And I'm just really excited about what God is doing in our midst. And I'm also really excited about the series that we're in. It's called Different. And if you weren't here over the last couple of weeks, just to kind of catch you up to speed to where we've been diving into the book of 1 Peter. It's a letter that was written a couple of thousand years ago by Peter, who did ministry with Jesus, who walked with Jesus, who ministered with Jesus, and then was set into ministry by Jesus. And now he's writing a letter to a bunch of Christians that are scattered throughout what was then the Roman Empire. And they were scattered because they were under intense persecution. It was not a safe time to be a Christian. And so Peter writes a letter to them in the midst of that scenario. And honestly, if you were living as a Christian in the Roman Empire, the temptation would be to hide. The temptation would be to blend in. But the interesting thing about 1 Peter is that nothing about 1 Peter says blend in. Nothing about 1 Peter says fade into the background or hide or cover up who you are. Everything about 1 Peter is a call to embrace the fact that you are different. Not only to embrace the fact that you are, but to live more fully into being different. Like, we want to actually not like diminish how different we are, but actually increase how radically different we are and how radically different they are from the culture surrounding them. It's a call not only to them thousands of years ago, but it's a call to you and I today. And we have so much we can learn from this letter that Peter wrote to this really struggling church. Struggling in terms of oppression, but not struggling in terms of spirit. Not struggling in terms of movement, because it was still growing in dramatic fashion. And so the first week we talked about the reality that we're called to a different type of faith in the midst of hard times. That if you're going to live in that kind of a culture, you have to have a faith that can pull you through the difficult times. And not only a different faith, but also, then last week, Dan did a great job of talking about the different values that we have to have in the midst of an unholy culture. And today we're gonna take it to in a different direction. And explore what does it mean to have a different calling. Because as you read the letter of 1 Peter that 1 Peter wrote, it's all throughout it, you'll begin to see a theme. You'll see 3 words over and over again: calling, call, and called. Over and over again, you see these words that come up. And I've been reading 1 Peter repetitively over the last few weeks in preparation for the series, and these words stand out over and over again. And this usage of this language wasn't simply Peter encouraging them to be different. This was the God of the universe calling them to be different. It wasn't just simply a man saying, I encourage you to do this, we should do this. It was the God of the universe saying, I made you to be different. And I'm calling you to live fully into that. And I think for those of us who are following Jesus, this idea of calling or that we are called is something we wrestle with. And over the last week, I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I was at what we call a church planter assessment center. And what we do at the church planter assessment center is we bring a bunch of candidates in. This past week, there were 16 of them who are crazy enough to say, we think God might be calling us to plant a church. And we take that really seriously because we want to come alongside of them and support them. But the first thing we have to do is help them to determine whether that is true. Whether that really is their calling. And every candidate that rolled in this past week, all 16 of them, were asking 3 questions. Am I called to plant a church? That's the first one. within this denomination at this time? And the answer has to be yes to all of them for them to move forward. And so they're exploring their calling. And it was a beautiful and humbling experience for me to walk alongside of those men and women as they explored that. How beautiful of a reminder it is of why we do what we do, of why we started LifeChurch Livonia 3.5 years ago. It was an incredible opportunity, but humbling because they come and they're so excited. But we take it really seriously because if you're not called to this, you best not be doing it because it is brutal, but it is worth it. And so I spent the last few days doing that, and one of the people that was there was Don Earl Johnson. And Don Earl, many of you met him a few weeks ago when he was here preaching. He is the candidate to plant LifeChurch Auburn Hills, the 4th Life Church in Metro Detroit area. And we brought him to the assessment center to kind of see what everyone else, we said, we think Don Earl would be a great planter. What does everyone else think? And I am so pleased to tell you that he was approved to plant LifeChurch Auburn Hills unanimously. No hesitation. Every single one of the assessors that spent time with Don Earl said, you have found an amazing man, and his wife, Janetta, is incredible as well, and we believe God's going to do mighty things among them. And this group of people that we assessed were super diverse in their giftedness, in their backgrounds, but every single one of them had at least one thing in common, and it had to do with calling. And it had to do with the very first calling that they responded to. Because every single one of them, at some point in their life, had responded to the eternal call of Christ. This is the Christian calling at its simplest form, at its most basic introductory form. This is when, at some point in their life, that something moved inside of them. They heard a message, or they listened to a song, or they had a relationship with a friend, and God began to move in them. And they could sense that God was calling them to himself, to a relationship, to a new way of living, to a redeemed life. And every single one of these men and women had responded to that eternal call of Christ, where they'd said yes to a relationship with Jesus. And everything else that they were doing was flowing out of that eternal call. And my hope is that every person that comes through the doors of LifeChurch Livonia would have an opportunity to respond to this call at some point in your life. That's why the gospel, the good news of Jesus, is so important to us, because this is the first and primary call. We are first called to Jesus, and everything else flows out from that point. And when we respond to the call of God in our life and we say yes to God through Jesus Christ, we can begin to praise God along with Peter in the same way that he does in 1 Peter 1, verses 3 through 4, when he says, all praise to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. It is by his great mercy that we have been born again, because God raised Jesus Christ from the dead. And now we live with great expectation. And we have a priceless inheritance, an inheritance that is kept in heaven for you, pure and undefiled, beyond the reach of change and decay. This is an incredible exclamation of praise, and it's true of every single one of you that has said yes to Jesus. That because of the mercy of God that we've received through what Jesus has done through us with his death and his resurrection, we have an incredible, priceless inheritance that we live into. And this would have been such good news to the first century Christians who were scattered and struggling and broken and persecuted. For Peter to say, listen, that eternal calling in Christ that all of you responded to is safe. It's beyond the reach of any oppressor. It's beyond the reach of anybody who condemns you. It's beyond the reach of any circumstance of your life. You are safe in the arms of Jesus. This is the first and the primary calling that everyone is being invited into. And when we talk about this type of calling, it elicits a kind of image for me of naming something. We see this all throughout Scripture, that when God calls something, he names it. Think about in Genesis when he made the day, the night, and he called it night, and he called it day, and he made a first human, and he called him man, and all of these things that God creates, when he names them, it's an act of divine creation. And even with Peter, who wrote this letter, when Jesus first met Peter, his name was not Peter. His name was Simon. And he looks at him. Imagine if Jesus did this to you. He looks at him the very first day that he met him, and he says, your name will no longer be Simon, it'll be Peter, because on your life, I will build my church. Because what Jesus did is he looked at Peter, and he renamed him because he saw the essence of who Peter was and the potential that was lying inert in him. He said, I see you. Beyond your name tag, beyond your surname or your whatever your family name is, beyond the labels that people place on you. So many of us carry labels that the world, that our family, that our boss, that our coworkers, that our classmates have placed on us, none of which pierce to the core of your identity. When Jesus names you, it reveals the very essence of your soul and calls you out to be something that you never could have been without him. This is calling. This is transformation. This is way beyond labeling because it's divine name calling. And where we have to start today is first and foremost, by responding to the eternal call to Christ, we have an opportunity to be recreated, to be renamed, to be reborn, to start fresh today. And that is incredibly good news. And it's out of that divine name calling that we get our specific assignments. So not only do we have an eternal call to Christ, we have a temporary call to specific tasks. Every single one of you that said yes to Jesus will be called over and over and over again to specific tasks. Most of those will be temporary. There'll be something you're called to do now, but maybe 5 years from now you won't be called to that. We see it over and over again in our lives. As you look back over the course of following Jesus over 10, 20, 30, 40 years, everyone that's been following Jesus can say, yeah, there were seasons when I was called to do different things. And this is essentially what those pastors that I met with this past week were doing. All 16 of them were saying, we wonder if we're called to plant a church. It's a temporary call to a specific task. And for a season, they would be labeled church planter, but at their core and their essence, that's not the only thing they are. They're son of God, child of God, daughter of the Most High King, redeemed, loved, cherished. We're all called to temporary, specific tasks. Every single one of you that says yes to Jesus will be called to this. And the problem with that is this, is that a lot of us get stuck here. We get stuck here because we way overthink it. We try to sort out, well, what is my specific calling? And what is are my specific gifts? And I'm not sure whether this is the right thing. And I'm not sure if I'm doing the wrong thing. And I'm not sure whether I've been doing this long enough or if I've been doing it too long. And I'm not sure what am I going to do, Lord? What am I called to do? Who am I called to be? And we get so wrapped up in our head about it that we become paralyzed and do nothing. We do nothing. And we sit back and we're waiting to be called to a specific task. And along the way, we miss assignment after assignment after assignment because we get stuck focusing on what we are called to do when we should be focusing on who we are called to be. They're different. We have to focus on who we are called to be so that we'll be able to sort out what it is that we're called to do. And so not only do we have an eternal call to Christ, and that leads into temporary calls to specific tasks, but I think more importantly for today, we also are called to, we have a daily call to a different way of life. And as we live into that different way of life, it's in the midst of that day-to-day following of Jesus, saying yes to Jesus, being transformed by Jesus. It's in the midst of saying yes to a daily call to a different way of life that we find our specific tasks. That we find our very essence and our being, and therefore what we should be doing. Peter got this. He understood that in order for these first century Christians to live fully into what they were called to do, they had to understand, to be reminded of who they were. Because when you know who you are, you know what to do. Peter got that, and he wanted to make sure that they knew it. And remember that they would have been really tempted to blend in. To be anything but different. They would have been tempted to hide the fact that they were a part of this growing group that was calling themselves Christians. Because in that culture, it was not easy to be a Christian, not only because of the persecution, but the persecution had roots. And the roots of that persecution were misunderstandings of what it even meant to be a follower of Jesus. You wouldn't believe the things that people within the Roman Empire believed about the early Christians. If you think that it's difficult at times to be a Christian in our culture, we have no idea what it's like to live in a difficult culture. Listen to some of the things that the Roman Empire believed about Christians. The first was this. Many people believed that the early Christians were magicians or sorcerers. Because they were seeing all these miracles happen. They're like, what kind of sorcery is this? Who do you study? And like, Jesus was their Gandalf or their Dumbledore or something if you're a Harry Potter fan. And it sounds ridiculous, right? But people believed that. They thought they must be sorcerers or magicians. Imagine if you're like, no, listen. No, it's not that. It's not a spell. It's that we follow a God who's empowering us to do life-giving miracles for people. They're fighting against this label, this identity that was so far from what they were. And that pales in comparison to some of the other ideas that the Roman Empire had about Christians. The next thing that they believed at times were that they were incestuous. You're like, how did they get that? Well, one of the things that they were known for is that they did these things called these love feasts, these agape meetings. That's what they were kind of becoming known for, these gatherings where they would all get together in what they called a love feast. Well, guess who was invited to the love feasts? Their brothers and sisters in Christ. People were like, that's creepy. Like, what? You're going to a love meeting with your brother and sister? Like, what's wrong with you? And the reason they believed that is because all they had for context was the temple worship around them. That was all often filled with all sorts of pagan sex rites. And so they're looking at the Christians gathering in these love feasts with their brothers and sisters in Christ, and they're like, there's something wrong with you. They're fighting against this false perception. And beyond that, I think one of the ones that would be most damaging to their reputation is some people wondered if they were cannibals. You're like, how in the world? Well, think about communion. When Jesus says, take and eat my body, imagine how confusing that is from the outside looking in. They're like, are you, what? Love feasts? Cannibalism? Incestuous creepiness? Like, why would I want to be a part of that? And so they were fighting against these false labels, these false identities. And Peter says, pause for a second. I want to remind you who you are. Step outside of all of these awful things that people are saying about you. Step outside of this struggle you have of being persecuted and someone's being killed for your faith and just pause and listen. Do you know who you are? Do you really know who you are? And Peter reminds them. 1 Peter 2:9. He says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession. This is incredible news. A person that felt displaced, that felt anything but chosen, and for Peter to say, listen, you're chosen by God. You're special. And not only that, but you are part of a royal priesthood. It used to be that the only way to have interaction with God was through a mediator, a priest. But now Jesus has torn the veil and made it accessible to all people, that all of you are priests now because you bear the good news of Jesus Christ everywhere you go. Every single one of you called to a role in that kingdom. All of you a part of royal priesthood. And because of that, you are part of a holy nation. You feel displaced. You feel like you have no place. But you are a part of something that is so much bigger than you. And above all things, don't forget ever that you are God's special possession. He cherishes you. He loves you. He values you. How do you treat a special possession? With reverence and care and love. And Peter says, don't forget who you are, but he doesn't stop at just reminding them who they are. He goes on to describe what they're called to do. He says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. There's that word again, called. They would have been tempted to hide in the shadows. But Peter says, no, that you're not a people of the shadows anymore. You're all of these incredible things and so much more. And I'm calling you out of the shadows, out of the darkness, into the amazing, marvelous, wonderful, life-giving light of God. I'm calling you into that. He says, you are chosen, you are redeemed, you are set free, you are transformed by the love of God. You are so much more than you were before you met God, because when God calls you, he names you. And when God names you, he recreates you. And when God recreates you, he makes you into something that is at the core of who you are. He reveals the beautiful essence of your very soul and sets you out on a path that you never could have walked without him. Let me remind you of who you are. It's an act of creation when God names you. I love how the New Living Translation says it. It says, you are a chosen people. You are royal priests, a holy nation, God's very own possession. And as a result, you can show others the goodness of God. For he called you out of the darkness into his wonderful light. As a result of who you are called to be, you begin to sort out what it is you are called to do. So we start here with this question today. And I ask you, do you know who you are called to be? Not what you're called to do. Do you know who you are? Would you like to step into a relationship with God and that begins to reveal that to you? That strips away all of these false labels that the world has placed on you. Smart, ugly, thin, fat, whatever it is that the world has placed on you. Would you like to step into a place where Jesus gently and lovingly peels it away and says, I see you. I know you. Allow me to tell you who you're called to be. And when you do that, you will begin to sort out what you're called to do. People don't wonder anymore if we're sorcerers, do they? They're not like comparing us to Dumbledore or Gandalf. They're not wondering, hopefully, they're not wondering if we're incestuous creeps. If they are, then we're doing something really wrong. Really wrong. People are no longer wondering if we're cannibals because we celebrate communion. It's been cleared up. But they are thinking a lot of other things about us. They are thinking a whole lot of other things about us. They're thinking that we are self-righteous, intolerant bigots. And sometimes they're right. As people who haven't clearly understood who they're called to be, live out and say they're Christians and their lifestyle doesn't match what they say they are or who they're called to be. And so people begin to get mixed up in their head about who we are. And they look at us and they think, why would I want to be a part of that? And this is what I know to be true, and what Peter knew to be true, is that we will not debate those people or argue those people into believing what we believe. We have a daily call to live a different way, and the way that we live, we will call them into belief by how we behave. It's not that the words aren't important. It's that the behavior must match the words to show them the love of God, to show them the grace of God, to show them the mercy of God. The great German atheist philosopher Nietzsche was known to say this. He said that if he saw more redeemed people, he might be inclined to believe in their Redeemer. Boom. He said, hey, listen, if I saw more redeemed people, I might be more inclined to believe in your Redeemer. This is our culture to a T. Because what's going on with us in this day and age is that Christians who don't live fully into their daily calling to live a transformed life end up with a credibility gap. It's a credibility gap. That imagine if you had a friend who said, I have an incredible doctor you need to go see. Like, this doctor has done marvels for my life, and they're actually suffering and dying under that person's care. Would you go to that doctor? You're like, no way. What if a person said, man, my mechanic is amazing, but their car was always broken down? And they would take the car to the mechanic, and the next day it'd be like spewing black smoke out the tailpipe. You'd be like, why would I want to go to your mechanic? Your mechanic is like, or imagine if they said, I have an amazing chiropractor you should go to, but every time they come home from the chiropractor, they're like this. You know why? You're like, you're not even straight. Like, why would I want to? There'd be a credibility gap, right? It's ridiculous. You wouldn't go to those people. We have a credibility gap with the gospel and the way that it's manifested in our lives. So God is calling us to remember who we are so that we can live into what we are called to do. I love what he says next in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12. He says, live such good lives among the pagans, which is just another way of saying people that don't believe. Live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. Peter says, I am not going to try to convince them to believe like we believe. I'm going to show them what we believe by how we behave. This is huge. This is huge, and this is what we are called to do. To a different way of living that flows out of our being. I've had so many opportunities to do this throughout my life, and sometimes I've succeeded. Sometimes I've allowed, it all has to do with how much time I've been spending with Jesus. I know this, because whenever I spend time with Jesus, he reminds me of who I am. And when I remember who I am, then it enables me to live into what I'm called to do. And so there's a direct correlation between my time spent with Jesus and the impact that I have in the world. And I'm out serving and loving and caring and engaging and embracing and listening to people. And over again throughout my life, when I'm doing this kind of living, a different daily calling, people will say to me, why are you here? Not in a, like, I don't want you here kind of way, but in a, I can't believe you're here. Like, people don't just do this. People don't just show up like this. People don't love like this. People don't care like this. People aren't generous like that. They ask the questions that I long for them to ask, because then I can say, Jesus. That's it. Jesus is why I'm here. Jesus is the reason that I'm engaging you in the way that I am right now. I talked about Don Earl earlier from the new planter for LifeChurch Auburn Hills. And about 2 months ago, we were together at a different conference. And many times when pastors gather in large gatherings, people who have been wounded by the church or people that misunderstand who we are will show up at those pastors' gatherings and protest. And it happens regularly. And they'll stand outside the main gathering, and they'll hold signs up, and they'll say things that are not true, and sometimes hurtful, sometimes hateful. Most of them come out of pain somewhere. And honestly, it happens regularly enough that sometimes they kind of fade into the background where you don't notice them. My friend Alan Tumpkin tells a story about Don Earl at the Midwinter Conference we were at this year. And they're walking down the hallway, and there was a group of people that had gathered to protest. And Don Earl and Alan are walking down the hallway, and Alan didn't even notice the protesters. And suddenly he noticed that Don Earl wasn't at his side any longer. Like, where'd he go? And he's looking around for him, and then he suddenly notices these protesters that have signs up, and they're kind of doing a sit-in, and he's looking for Don Earl, and he sees that Don Earl is sitting on the floor with them. He'd stopped, compelled by who he is called to be, to sit and engage them, and to love them, and to hear their story, and to listen to their pain, and to share life. Over and over again, the same thing. We heard the same thing from this group that gathered every day of this week-long conference, is that they were shocked that we weren't who they thought we were. And people like Don Earl living in to who they're called to be, and because of that, doing what they're called to do, are a huge part of the reason why some of those people's hearts and minds began to change that week. As he sat with them, and lived life with them, and he saw them. We're called to be different daily. What if you and I could be different that way? What if our church was different? What would that do for Livonia? If we were radically different than what we typically see in Livonia or Westland or Redford or Northville or Plymouth or wherever it is you live, what if we were radically different? What if we were radically generous with our time and with our money? What if we responded differently than other people? What if today when you go out to lunch and you get a terrible server at lunch, you know the person that you're like, this guy does not want to be at work today. Or this lady clearly does not love her job. What if instead of getting frustrated at the poor service, what if you decided to tip them in advance? And you said, here, I just want to give you this. And they said, what's that for? And you say, it's your tip. And I just want you to know that nothing you do today is going to change how much I value you. What? If I was that server, I'd be like so confused. Why would you do that? I just want you to know that you're loved and nothing you do, you can't earn any more money from me today by the way you act. That's radical in its generosity. It's radical in the love. What if we could be different in the way that we're filled with grace? Filled with grace, especially for the people that drive us insane. What if we could be different than our coworkers? When that one guy or that one lady walks into the room and everyone else is like, oh my gosh. What if you were different? What if you went after them in relationship? Leaned into them with love and grace? What if you modeled, not in a proud or pretentious kind of way, but just in a life-giving manner, what it looked like to engage people that are struggling and hurting? What if we were overflowing with love because of the time we spend at the feet of Jesus? What would that do for the people around you if we were oozing love out of our pores? Some of the guys are thinking, that doesn't sound very masculine, but I would say it's one of the most masculine things you could do. To overflow with love. What if people could feel the difference when we were in the room? One of the couples that came to assessment this past week at the Church Planners Assessment was a couple named Cesar and Patty Butrago. They were Latino church planners from the Central Valley of California, and they were amazing. And they stood out. We were together with all these passionate, empowered, called church planners, and this couple stood out. And the reason they stood out is because they were overflowing with love. It just oozed out of them every step of the way, and it all was rooted in the time that they spent with Jesus. Cesar writes a love letter to Jesus every day in his journal. Every single day he writes a love letter to Jesus. And I didn't know that in advance, but I could feel it in his presence. We were doing an interview of him and his wife, and we were asking them all sorts of questions, making sure that they're good fit, making sure their theology is in sync, and asking them to tell stories of things they've done and past performance in different church settings and all these different things. Asking them, we were interviewing them to be church planners. And at the end of the time, the person who was leading that session says to our team of assessors, he says, "Does anyone have any additional questions?" And I raised my hand and I said, "Will you adopt me?" I was serious, I'm not going to lie. And Cesar, he says this in Spanish to me. He says, "God bless you, my brother. Welcome to my family." And he stood up and he hugged me. I'm not going to lie, I almost went to California with him. Just to spend a couple weeks living in their home. Because people want to be around people that are overflowing with love, who are filled with grace, who are radically generous. They want to know what's up, what's different. When you don't just mow your lawn, but you mow your neighbor's lawn too. When you don't just pay for your drink, you pay for the drink of the person behind you. When you don't walk away when the annoying person walks in the room, but you walk towards them. When you listen beyond what you feel you have the capacity to listen to. When you care beyond the capacity that you believe you have to care. People want to be around people who are different because they want to know what caused it. Jesus. Jesus causes it. And what if we took it even a step further? Because there's a lot of people, even who don't know Jesus, who are nice and generous and filled with grace and overflowing with love. But Christians take it a step further because we follow after Jesus. And Jesus modeled something that is so radical and so different that we have to read it to understand it. What if we chose to live a different kind of life even when it was hard? Listen to what it says in the next verse. For God called you to do good even if it means suffering. Just as Christ suffered for you. He is your example, and you must follow in his steps. This is this whole idea of being different to a whole new level. Beyond simply being nice or being kind or being loving. It's following Jesus even into the days when it's so difficult to do it. When you're being persecuted, when people misunderstand you, when people have hateful things or wrong things to say about your faith. It's following Jesus into those most difficult of days because he walked those most difficult of days. And in the midst of all of that, he was gentle. He was understanding. He was patient. He was the best listener. He was loving. He was forgiving. He was never proud or arrogant or puffed up in any way. Jesus wasn't condescending. He didn't argue with people. In fact, most of the time when they tried to argue with him, he would just ask them a really insightful question that would wreck their heart and head. And then he would love them, even when they didn't want to be loved. He was never defensive or hateful. What was he? He was everything. And we're called to follow in his steps. Listen to what it goes on and says. It says, Jesus, he never sinned, nor ever deceived anyone. He did not retaliate when he was insulted, nor threaten revenge when he suffered. He left his case in the hands of God, who always judges fairly. We struggle to do these things. We struggle to be these things because so often we are disconnected from the one who can empower us to do it in the first place. In order to be like Jesus, we have to follow Jesus. In order to be like Jesus, we have to engage Jesus, to respond to the call of Jesus. We struggle to do these things and to be this way because of our sin and brokenness. This is why we struggle to do it. But the best news in this entire section comes in the next line. The best news is we read this list and we're like, I can't do it because I'm too broken, I'm too sinful. It goes on and it says, but he, Jesus, personally carried our sins in his body on the cross so that we can be dead to sin, to that former way of life, to that former dead-end path, and live for what is right. How do we learn to do what God is calling us to do? By understanding who we are called to be and receiving that. And realizing that Jesus Christ, he walked this earth, he suffered, he loved, he cared, he nurtured, he listened. He responded beautifully, but then he went to the cross. He carried our sin and brokenness with him to that place and left it there. And then rose from the grave, empowering us to have new relationship with God. This is what enables us to live for what is right. Our eternal calling to Christ is where it begins. Jesus calls us first to himself and then to live out of that relationship, live out of that renaming, of that recreating into our various temporary callings. You have to know who you are before you can know what to do. Do you know? Do you know who you are? Are you spending the time with Jesus that's necessary for him to peel back the layers, past the name tags that have to come off? Honestly, these things here, the things that the world puts on us, Jesus will peel it off and reveal the essence. So I have two questions for you today. And I believe that every person in this room falls into one of these two categories. One is this: are you ready to be on call for Jesus? Do you already know Jesus? Have you already said yes to him? Have you already begun the process of following him? And now you're saying, man, I'm ready to be on call. My doctor and nurse friends know what this is like. When they're on call, they have to carry their phone or in the old days, a pager. And what being on call meant is that you had to be ready at a moment's notice to live into your training, to live into your calling, to perform that surgery or care for that patient or step up into that situation. Or maybe you're a volunteer firefighter and you're stepping out to save someone or rescue someone or respond to a call. That's what it means to be on call. And the question I have for you who are following Jesus already, are you ready to be on call for Jesus? To step out in love, to lean into grace, to listen well and care well, and to serve well. I'm ready to be on call. Sign me up. And my prayer is that all of us would sign up together and that as we do it, Livonia would be transformed. And so the first question is, are you ready to be on call for Jesus? And the second is for those of you who have never had an opportunity to hear God calling your name in the first place. And the question I have for you is this: are you ready to respond to the call of Jesus for the very first time? Are you ready? Maybe something is stirring in you. Maybe you've been coming to church for a long time, or maybe you grew up in the church, but you're sitting here today and you're thinking to yourself, I don't know who I am. I don't know that I've ever actually just given it all to Jesus. He's been calling me for a long time, and I know that because of the relationships he's placed in my life. I know that because I can feel it inside of me right now. Are you ready to respond to the call of Jesus for the first time? And I want you to know, when you do, he will begin the process of changing everything in a beautiful way, of renaming you, recreating you into the person that you were designed to be in the first place. Would you stand with me? I want to pray for you right now. And the first group I want to pray for you is the group that maybe you're in a place where today is the day where you're ready to respond to the call of Jesus for the first time. If that's you, I just invite you to pray with me. And then I'm going to pray for those who are already following Jesus. And so would you pray with me? Just close your eyes, bow your heads. And Jesus, right now, we just come to you, worshiping you in this place. You are the beginning and the end of all things, including my identity, including my understanding of myself, and everything, God. It starts with you. And there are people in this room right now who have been toying with the idea of being in a deep relationship with you, who have dipped their toe in the pool but have never jumped in all the way, responding to your call to a relationship with you. And if that's you in this room today, I just invite you to pray quietly in your own heart with me right now and just say to Jesus in the quiet of your heart, Jesus, I hear your call and I say yes. Say yes to your forgiveness. I say yes to your power to transform. I say yes to the process of learning who I really am. I say yes to leaving behind all of my mistakes and my brokenness and my past, and I choose to say yes to your call today. Jesus, for those who are here and already have said yes to you, maybe today is the day where they've been sitting on the sidelines and they realize that it's time to get into the game and they're ready to be on call for you, ambassadors of love and grace and mercy and hope and justice in the world. And if that's you right now in your heart, I just encourage you to pray and say, Jesus, I say yes to your call. Help me to know who I am so that I can know what to do. And when the day comes that you call me to a temporary and very specific task, God, I promise right now, I will say yes through your love and in your power. We love you, Jesus. We are so grateful that we get to be a part of what you're doing. We are so grateful that you make it all possible. And we pray these things in your name. Amen.